So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with kind of a provocative thought, something to chew on the next time you encounter a shrewd, highly successful leader in the wild. If we know for a fact that high mocks cause so much interpersonal damage, if they diminish the well-being of their subordinates and operate without any genuine empathy, why does our society, especially in the corporate and political worlds, so frequently reward their calculated behavior with money, leadership, and power? Keep your eyes open out there. The master manipulators are definitely walking among us. But hey, now you know exactly how to spot them.
Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are cracking open a seriously fascinating psychological dossier. We're profiling the master manipulator. You know the exact type we're talking about, right? The person who always seems to be playing 3D chess while the rest of us are just playing checkers. Now, before we start pointing fingers at our former bosses or our ex-friends, I want to let you in on a little secret that researchers have known for decades. We actually all fall somewhere on this psychological spectrum. So today, we're going to break down the actual science of manipulation using exactly what the data tells us.
I want you to really think about it for a second. What actually makes someone a master manipulator? What are those hidden traits that define a person who calculates, deceives, and just pulls the strings in the background, entirely to serve their own self-interest? Is it like an innate lack of feeling? Or maybe it's some sort of brilliant but totally dark intellect? Well, as we're about to see, psychology has a very specific, rigorously tested answer to this. And honestly, the true profile of these individuals might completely surprise you. All right, let's get into it. Section 1, Beyond the Political Myth. First things first, we need to clear up a massive historical misconception. When we talk about this, the political theory of Niccolò Machiavelli is actually vastly different from the modern psychological construct of Machiavellianism. Basically, the psychological trait has absolutely nothing to do with the historical figure or his politics. Scholars totally agree there's a huge conceptual divergence here. So what happened was, researchers in the mid-20th century just used his name and some sentences inspired by his writings as a sort of litmus test to study deceptive behavior. It was honestly just a convenient label because other names like the manipulator scale just had scientific validity issues. Okay, so picture this. It's 1955. Psychologist Richard Christie is looking around and realizes there's plenty of research out there on the followers of extremist movements, but there's almost nothing on the people who actually led and manipulated them. That's a huge blind spot, right? So throughout the 1960s, Christie and his colleague Florence Geis worked to develop a way to measure this, and this all culminated in their groundbreaking 1970 book, Studies in Machiavellianism. They essentially created a standardized way to identify individuals who operated with a profound lack of emotion and just a total unconcern for conventional morality. Which brings us to Section 2, Anatomy of a Manipulator. Here is the absolute crucial takeaway. Being a high mock, which is the shorthand psychologists use for someone scoring high on this scale, it isn't a clinical diagnosis. You're not going to find it in the DSM. Instead, it's a personality continuum that measures a cold, totally unemotional temperament. High mocks view the world in a super practical, instrumental way. They aren't held back by ideological allegiances or loyalty. They are entirely focused on pragmatically getting things done specifically for their own benefit. So how do we spot them? Well, using Christie and Geis's famous 20-question Mach 4 test, we can get a really clear look at how high mocks view the world. In spoiler alert, it's a deeply cynical and pragmatic lens. For example, if you strongly agree with the statement, "Never tell anyone the real reason you did something unless it is useful," well, you're scoring higher on this trait. On the flip side, high mocks strongly disagree with the idea that most people are basically good and kind. That right there is the core of the high mock mindset, a fundamental, deep-seated distrust of others, perfectly paired with a total willingness to exploit them. Now, this next part is literally fascinating. It's all about how they process emotion. Psychology generally divides empathy into two distinct types. You have hot or affective empathy, which is when you actually share and feel someone else's emotions. Then you have cold or cognitive empathy, which is just mentally understanding how someone is going to react. High mocks, they have incredibly high cold empathy. They can read a room and anticipate your exact reactions perfectly, but they have absolutely zero hot empathy. They literally do not care about your feelings. And that combination is exactly what equips them to manipulate others without feeling a shred of guilt or remorse. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3, Born or Made. So are these people just born this way, or does society somehow create them? Behavioral genetics studies actually reveal a fascinating mix of both nature and nurture.
On the genetic side of things, high Machs often show a blunted cortisol awakening response. Now that's highly heritable, and it's directly linked to that lack of affective empathy we just talked about. Some researchers even call it a genetically determined cool syndrome. But hey, the environment plays a massive role here too. Studies show this trait very often develops as a strategic coping mechanism for early emotional deprivation, childhood neglect, or having highly punitive caregivers. Basically, they learn super early on that the world isn't a safe place, so their way of adapting is just to manipulate it. All right, let's dive even deeper. Section 4. Inside the Dark Triad. Psychologists have this fierce ongoing debate when mapping out these dark subclinical personality traits. You've probably heard of the Dark Triad. While all three of these types share an intense focus on self-interest and a major lack of empathy, their actual motivations are completely distinct. Narcissists, for instance, manipulate because they are desperately driven by this constant need for validation and admiration. Psychopaths and Machiavellians, though, they are much closer in nature. Both are incredibly callous and manipulative. But, as we'll see, the way they actually execute their dark agendas is remarkably different.
The real defining boundary between those two? It all comes down to impulse control. Psychopaths tend to be reckless, impulsive, and they'll act out regardless of the situation or the consequences. High Machs, however, are extremely sensitive to consequences. They engage in very cautious planning, and they will absolutely delay gratification to ensure their ultimate success. A high Mach is only going to manipulate when there is a clear, highly calculated gain, and they are acutely aware of potential punishments. This restraint is exactly why they are often described as the true master manipulators.
And this dynamic right here perfectly explains why white-collar criminals, think Bernie Madoff, aren't necessarily psychopaths. Instead, they are highly controlled high Machs playing a very long-term game. As researcher Delroy Paulhus so brilliantly points out, malevolent stockbrokers use deliberate, highly strategic procedures to exploit people. A genuine psychopath simply lacks the basic self-control needed to orchestrate those kinds of complex, multi-year financial schemes. High Machs are literally perfectly suited to skirt the legal system, simply because they so carefully weigh the risks against the benefits before they ever make a move.
Which leads us to our final part. Section 5, Machs in the Wild.
Let's look at the corporate landscape. High Machs are, quite frankly, dangerously ambitious. The data shows they are naturally drawn to highly competitive academic majors and fields. We're talking economics, law, politics. In the office, they are entirely willing to cut corners and openly exploit their coworkers just to aggressively climb that ladder. They'll use flattery when it serves them, coercion when they need to, and honestly, as a result, they actually excel at securing leadership positions and getting much higher salaries.
But what about after hours, right? When the laptop closes? Well, because they lack genuine emotional affect, they approach their friendships and their romantic lives with the exact same utilitarian, self-interested strategy that they use at work. In social settings, a high Mach will easily just conform their opinions to ingratiate themselves into a group. They are incredibly observant, and they tend to pick pliable friends who can be easily exploited later. And in romance, the research actually shows they prefer emotionally detached short-term relationships. Get this, there's even a documented phenomenon in courtship where folks high on this scale engage in foodie calls, literally going on dates entirely to get free food rather than seeking any actual romantic connection. For them, it is always about the transaction.